Welcome to the movie The Heart. And so this movie is going to be directed by myself, Shyam Patel.
Me, Katie Spears.
Myself, Zephyron Russell. As you can see here, we have an EKG wave and an animation of a heart beating. Listen to that sound. As you can hear, it makes a lub-dub sound. Some important vocab words to know during this movie, is diastole and systole. Diastole is a phase of the cardiac cycle when the heart muscle relaxes and allows chambers to fill with blood. Systole is a phase when the heart muscle contracts and pumps blood from chambers into arteries. These two are what make up the cardiac cycle.
And so here's a more better picture of the cardiac cycle. So the average cardiac cycle is for 0.8 seconds. In the first stage of the cardiac cycle, which is around 0.4 seconds, so quick maths, it's half of the cardiac cycle, you have ventricular diastole and atrial diastole, which means blood is being filled in the atriums and the ventricles. In the next step, which is stage 2, you have atrial systole and ventricular diastole. So you have the atriums contracting and the ventricles are still being filled with even more blood. And then in the stage 3, which is 0.3 seconds, you have ventricular systole and atrial diastole. So you have the ventricles contracting, moving blood out from the heart, and the atriums are getting even more blood filled into them. And if you notice, majority of the cardiac cycle is all about diastole. So the heart is always filling up with blood.
Next, we're going to go into more specifics of these three stages. I'm going to talk about stage 1. During this time, the atria is relaxed, filling up with blood flowing into the ventricles. It's important to know that there is a drop in pressure in the ventricles. This part of the stage of the cardiac cycle tells you your diastolic blood pressure, which is the bottom number of your blood pressure. In humans, it's usually around 80 millimeters of mercury. Things that can prevent this stage from properly working are when there's a valve leak or a leaflet might get inverted. So if this happens during the semilunar valves, your right and your left, that's going to cause some blood to flow up into the atrium and into the pulmonary arteries, which is not the goal of diastole. It's important to also note that during the stage, it does not lead to any of the sounds in the heartbeat, as it's just a relaxation time for the heart. And this part takes half of the time of the cardiac cycle, like previously mentioned.
So this is the stage 2 of the heart. And so this is when the atriums are contracting and the ventricles are still filling up with even more blood. And this means all the blood from the atriums are being transported into ventricles. And it is very important to note that both the ventricles have the same volume of blood being filled into them. And stage 2 is actually the shortest time in the cardiac cycle. It's only 0.1 seconds out of the whole 0.8 seconds. And at the very end of stage 2, you get your first heartbeat sound, which is lub. And this happens because the AV valves, which are between the atriums and the ventricles, actually close because you don't want the ventricles, when they contract, pushing blood back into the atrium. So those close and that causes the lub sound. But in every movie, there can always be a plot twist. So sometimes these ventricles actually have a hole in them, and that's called ventricular septal defect. And this can cause the blood in the left ventricle and the right ventricle to mix with each other. And this causes deoxygenated blood and oxygenated blood to mix together, and that can be bad for you.
Okay, so next we're going to be talking about stage 3 of the cardiac cycle, which is ventricular systole and atrial diastole. So during this phase, the AV valves are closed while the semilunar valves are open, and the ventricles are contracting to push blood out of the heart. So it's pushing or pumping deoxygenated blood to the lungs from the right side of the heart. and it's pumping oxygenated blood to the rest of the body from the left side of the heart. During this, we have that dub sound of the lub dub sound of the heart, which is the closing of the semilunar valves at the end of this stage, right before stage 1 begins again. Because again, this is a cycle. So you go 1, 2, 3, and then back to 1 again. And again, another sort of plot twist is any of the valves of the ventricles are not working correctly, like one's inverted the wrong way. This could be, or this could lead to irregular heartbeats within the heart. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this is an EKG wave, or an electrocardiogram wave, which shows the electrical impulses during the cardiac cycle. So if you see right before the P wave, we have atrial diastole and ventricular diastole. And this is stage 1 that we talked about of that cardiac cycle. And then what's going on is at the beginning of that, or the peak of that P wave, we have something called an SA node, which is in the right atrium of the heart. And this SA node, or a node in general, is just a cluster of cells. And what happens is this node starts to fire and release signals to the atrium, which then makes the atrium contract during stage 2 of the cardiac cycle and during atrial systole. So this is where you're getting that contraction to pump blood from the atrium into the ventricles. Now, at that Q part, during that flat part, there's something called an AV node, which is also in that right atrium, which is accepting electrical impulses and activity from the SA node. And when it's straight, that's what it's doing during that time. And then when it sort of dips down, there's something called bundle branches in the ventricles, which begin to spread that signal from the SA node and the AV node to the ventricles, causing that little dip down. And then during that R, what's occurring, and during that S that we see too, there's something called Purkinje fibers that are spreading those electrical impulses all over the right and left ventricles, which is causing ventricular systole during stage 3 of the cardiac cycle. And this is when there's ventricular contraction, which is pumping blood from the ventricles out of the heart. And so then during that T wave, where there's no electrical signal, what's going on is this is the beginning of a rest period for the heart, so that the heart can recharge and start to begin this whole process over again. And this is where stage 1 can sort of like begin again, because what we're seeing is atrial diastole and then that switch into ventricular diastole, where the heart is relaxed. And then this makes up one entire cardiac cycle.
So we just wanted to thank you guys for watching our movie. Make sure that you leave a review on Rotten Tomatoes for us. And we hope that you understand the cardiac cycle and why your heart makes a lub-dub sound. Bye, guys.